Hey guys, my name is Tanner Anderson. I am one of the co-founders of Magic Hour Entertainment. Welcome to our YouTube channel, and please do not forget to subscribe along. And I thought it would be really fun if today we counted down the most bankable actors in the history of Hollywood.
Burt Reynolds was such a big star that after Steve McQueen unexpectedly passed away in 1980 at just the age of 50, the studio, they turned their attention to Burt Reynolds to replace Steve McQueen in one of their films called The Cannonball Run. But because he wasn't Steve McQueen, this movie went from a straight action film to an action comedy. And Burt Reynolds, he was paid $5 million in upfront salary for just 3 weeks of work. However, he also received 10% of the box office profits. And when this movie came out and did over $160 million worldwide at the box office, a lot of people, they were saying that wasn't because of Burt Reynolds. It was actually because of an actor from Hong Kong who was making his American film debut by the name of Jackie Chan. And because Jackie Chan was in this movie, it did massive numbers in Asian markets. And this led to Burt Reynolds receiving an additional $5.7 million in back-end money, coupled with the $5 million in upfront salary, for a total of $10.7 million, which today, adjusted for inflation, is over $37 million. Sometimes it doesn't matter how big of a movie star you are, a film can be too much of a gamble for a studio's taste. Case in point, The Passion of the Christ, because at the time, Mel Gibson, he was one of the biggest stars in the entire world, but the studio, they did not want to put up that kind of money for a Christian film. So Mel Gibson, in order to get his passion project funded, pun intended, he decided to self-finance the movie himself, putting up $30 million. And then he put up an additional $15 million in marketing for a total of $45 million out of his own personal finances. And so this actually turned out to be a really good investment because that meant he kept all the profits from the film plus all the intellectual property. So after he paid back the studio a small distribution fee, when The Passion of the Christ came out and not only became the highest grossing Christian film of all time, but also the highest grossing independent film of all time, doing $612.1 million worldwide at the box office, this meant Mel Gibson made himself $300 million in profits. But it doesn't end there because, you see, he owned all the intellectual property rights. So that meant he owned all the merchandising from the film as well, which accounted for an additional $100 million in profits. Plus, on top of that, this movie was released in 2004 at the height of the DVD boom. So it did another $10 million in sales on DVDs, which amounted to another $75 million in Mel Gibson's pocket for a total of $475 million, which today, adjusted for inflation, is nearly $800 million. Born in Chicago in 1942, growing up in a middle-class household, Harrison Ford's father, he was an advertising executive who occasionally would do some work as a radio actor. And this is where he met Harrison's mother, who was a radio actress as well. However, as a young kid, Harrison Ford, he was quite shy, a feeling of being invisible since he didn't fit in with a particular crowd. However, when he decided to attend Ripon College in Wisconsin, right before graduating, Harrison Ford, he decided to take an acting class to overcome his fear of public speaking. In fact, he took to this acting class so much, he began focusing all of his attention on this new craft, getting expelled from school just 4 days prior to graduation, which led Harrison Ford to making the decision that he was going to move to Los Angeles to pursue a career as an actor, doing so in the summer of 1964. And at first, he had some success, signing a contract with Columbia Pictures and then later on with Universal, but it wouldn't be until he met George Lucas while auditioning for a role in the film American Graffiti that everything in his life would change forever, leading to Harrison Ford becoming one of the biggest movie stars in the history of cinema. Born in London in 1903, when Bob Hope was only 4 years old, his family emigrated to the United States, settling in Cleveland, Ohio. However, he had 7 brothers, so money was always tight for the family. So at the age of 12, he decided to become a street performer to try and make some money to help the family out. In fact, The moment that changed his life forever was when he was a teenager. He entered a talent competition under his legal name Lester Hope. And after placing first in this competition for a comedy routine that he had created, this led to him getting small gigs all around Cleveland. And by the time he had graduated from high school, he had built up such a name for himself that he started performing vaudeville. And this led to him going to Broadway in the 1920s before becoming a massive radio star during the 1930s, which directly led to him getting a contract from Hollywood in the late 1930s, which is where he met Bing Crosby, and the two of them, they started a partnership that is one of the greatest in the history of cinema. In the mid-1910s, Mary Pickford was one of the biggest movie stars in the entire world. She was known as America's sweetheart, one of the first actors to command a massive salary. And then, around 1916, this is when she was first introduced to Douglas Fairbanks, who was a leading man that was on the rise in Hollywood. Only problem was, they were both married to other people at the time, so this relationship, it first started off as a friendship. They bonded over a shared sense of ambition and their frustration with how the movie studios controlled their careers. So, after they both divorced their spouses, which at the time was deemed extremely scandalous, they married each other in 1920, with their wedding becoming a global event, and they were instantly Hollywood's first power couple. But even before they were married, they began having conversations with Charlie Chaplin and D.W. Griffin about starting their own movie studio, which they did in 1919. And this idea, it was radical because instead of being employees, they became owners and profit participants in the films that they started. And it didn't function like a studio either. It was more of a distribution company for artist-controlled films, a way for top talent to bypass the studio control. Mary Pickford, she revolutionized Hollywood because she gave artists ownership over their work, and she changed how profits were distributed, and she set the blueprint for modern independent filmmaking. She wasn't just a star, but she was the first celebrity to use her power to fight for creative and financial control for things in which she was a part of. By 1982, Paul Newman had been a movie star for well over 20 years, and when he wasn't shooting a film, he was an avid cook. So one day he's in his kitchen making his own salad dressing that he would put into old wine bottles and give away to friends. That's when one of Paul's friends came into the kitchen and told him that he should sell it and call it Newman's Own. And at first, Paul Newman, he thought his friend was joking, so he jokingly said back, "Yeah, and after I sell it, I will give all the profits to charity." And this is how he started his own food company, which retailers at first didn't take seriously because celebrity food brands, they weren't really a thing back then. Plus, the packaging, it was quirky and unconventional. However, when people started to try the product, it turned out to be really good. Then seemingly overnight, the salad dressing Paul Newman was making in his kitchen, it became a hit. And a line of other foods, they soon followed suit. Pretty soon, he had a full-fledged food empire on his hands. In fact, Newman's Own is one of the most successful charitable food companies ever, having given away over $600 million to charity since it first began in the 1980s. By the early 1940s, Bing Crosby was not only the biggest movie star in the entire world, he was also one of the most popular singers in America. Plus, on top of all that, he also hosted a weekly radio show that was broadcast nationwide, including to a military audience that was serving overseas. And for those soldiers, hearing Bing's voice, it felt like a piece of home. And then he recorded White Christmas in 1942, and it really struck a chord with the boys in battle that captured exactly what they were missing from home. This song, it would go on to become the best-selling single of all time, the unofficial anthem of the troops fighting in World War II. And Bing Crosby, he understood the power that he had over these men serving overseas, so he would often go over there to perform live to try and lift their spirits, going through long and exhaustive travel, sometimes in combat zones, just so he could connect with these troops. And the soldiers would say that hearing his voice, it made them feel human again. And for the remainder of his career, Bing Crosby, he was not only one of the biggest movie stars to ever live and greatest singers to ever grace the stage, but he was forever linked to those men that he brought comfort to during their most trying times of their entire lives. Clark Gable's mother passed away when he was only 10 months old, and a few years later, his father, he would remarry, and the woman that he married, she would raise Clark as if he were her own, teaching him how to play the piano and other brass instruments, with Clark Gable actually becoming the only boy in the school band at the age of 13. And this concerned his father because he wanted him to do more masculine activities like hunting and repairing cars and hard manual labor, even though Gable, he preferred to read literature and recite Shakespeare. So at the age of 21, he decided that he was going to leave home and become a professional actor after receiving a $300 inheritance after his grandmother passed away. And he began training rigorously with an acting teacher who was 17 years older than him. Actually, he ended up marrying this woman, and this led to him beginning to work in a touring theater company throughout most of the 1920s. However, in the mid-1920s, he got his first role in a Broadway play that gave him more recognition and put him on the radar of Hollywood studios. However, Gable, he was used to doing theater, so the silent film era was difficult for him, and most studio executives, they didn't take Clark Gable seriously. That was until the industry shifted to talkies, and suddenly Clark Gable, he had an advantage from all of those years of training, his beautiful polished voice that he had worked on for years with his wife, and this led to him getting a contract from MGM in the early 1930s, the first step to launching his career into superstardom. Tom Hanks is a distant cousin of President Abraham Lincoln and children's television host Mr. Rogers, which is pretty ironic when you consider that Hanks actually portrayed Mr. Rogers in a movie that got him nominated for an Academy Award. And for a man who made a career out of being a normal guy in abnormal circumstances, his childhood, it was anything but normal. He lived in 10 different houses, going to the theater and the movies all by himself just to escape the chaos that was his home life. And Tom Hanks, he first decided to get into acting while he was in high school because he figured that was the best place to go for someone like him who was loud and flamboyant. Plus, he always felt like he fit in, and he didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. So Hanks decided theater was his best pathway forward, studying in college. However, before he graduated, Tom Hanks, he decided to take an internship at a theater festival in Cleveland, Ohio. And instead of finishing his degree, for the next few years, he lived a nomadic actor's lifestyle, putting on full productions almost by himself. And this stage work eventually led him to getting recognized by a talent scout, which led to him moving to New York City in 1979 at just the age of 23. And from there, he began landing roles on television shows, and his career, it was off to the races. His understated acting style is a byproduct of his lived experience as a child, having to fit into a bunch of different worlds from a young age and observe everything that was happening around him, because Gary Cooper was born in Montana, but from the ages of 8 to 12, he was sent to live with family in England so he could study there because his mother wanted him to receive a British education, but then he was sent back to Montana to attend high school. And however, while he was attending college, Gary Cooper, he had dreams of becoming an illustrator for cartoons until he got into a car accident that injured him so badly that the doctors told him he needed to move to warmer climate. And this is why Gary Cooper decided to move to Los Angeles, a fortuitous decision because when he arrived in the city of Angels, he had two buddies that he grew up with in Montana that were already living there. Therefore, Cooper, he was able to get himself some work through them as a stunt writer on Western films since he had grown up riding horses in Montana. And this gig, it eventually led to him being noticed by the studios because he wasn't theatrical or flashy, allowing Gary Cooper to go from stunt writer to extra to day player to leading man to movie star in only a few short years after arriving in Hollywood. This is how big of a star Tom Cruise is. After he divorced Nicole Kidman in 2001, the Church of Scientology, they secretly held auditions to try and help him find a new girlfriend, but This project, it didn't yield any results because while he was filming the movie Vanilla Sky, he met actress Penelope Cruz, who is his co-star in that movie, and the two of them, they began a relationship. And the only reason that Tom Cruise was doing this movie in the first place was because the studio offered him an ungodly sum of money, a contract that we had never seen before in the history of Hollywood and we have never seen again. He got paid $20 million in upfront salary plus 30% of the film's first dollar gross, meaning he didn't have to wait for the film to break even and get into profits before he started seeing extra money. He started seeing money from the very second that it was released in theaters, whether the movie had turned a profit or not. So when Vanilla Sky did over $200 million worldwide at the box office, this meant Tom Cruise, he netted himself an additional $48 million. And then on top of that, the $20 million for a total of $68 million, which ironically is the exact budget of this film. A turning point in Clint Eastwood's life occurred while he was enlisted in the U.S. Army in the early 1950s. During this time, he was stationed at a base that was right outside of Los Angeles, so he often met people with Hollywood connections. And one day, a CBS crew came out to film the troops, and the director of that piece spotted Clint Eastwood and he struck up a conversation. So after Eastwood was discharged from the U.S. Army, he decided to give acting a try, and he called up that director from CBS who helped him land a contract at Universal. However, early on, Eastwood, he didn't have much success. In fact, it took Clint Eastwood nearly 7 years to book his first steady work, doing so on a Western TV show. But this show, it didn't turn him into a star, anything but. So Eastwood knew that when it ended, his career might be over as well. So he needed to find something that could help break him out and do it fast. And he found this in the unlikeliest of places, a Western film that was being shot in Italy by an unknown director. It was offered to him, so he decided to accept. And when A Fistful of Dollars came out in 1964 and became a global sensation, Eastwood, he finally became a movie star more than 10 years after beginning his acting journey. The biggest movie star in the history of cinema was born Marion Morrison in Winterset, Iowa. However, when he began working for Fox Studios in the late 1920s, executives, they felt that his birth name, it didn't sound like a movie star name, and certainly it didn't sound like a Western hero's name. His first name, Marion in particular, they considered it to be too soft and feminine for his rugged image that they wanted to market him as. And that's when the head of the studio pushed for him to change his name to something that was stronger and more masculine. And that is how John Wayne was born. But initially, he didn't love that change, but he went along with it because that's how Hollywood worked at the time. Studios, they often controlled actors' names and their public identities. However, because he wasn't a fan of his new name, he started asking people to call him Duke, since that was his nickname as a child, since he was always accompanied by his dog that was named Duke. In fact, that nickname, it stuck with him for the remainder of his life amongst his friends and his colleagues, even after he became famous. And let's be honest, a strong mythical figure from Western movies named Marion Morrison, it really doesn't have the same ring to it as John Wayne now, does it?